Lived like polite strangers for 35 years. I was 50 when Daniel fell gravely ill. Right before he passed away, he looked at me quietly and said, "In the next life, let's just be strangers passing by, brushing past each other in the crowd." He didn't spell it out, but I knew exactly what was on his mind. For more than 35 years, he had never forgotten the image of Linda Moon, the woman who had left him for love. When she died in a foreign land, his soul seemed to die with her. For more than 25 years after that, he lived like a man in a daze, an empty shell without a soul. To outsiders, the man beside me was a flawless husband, but his heart had long since followed her. What people thought was mutual respect between us was nothing more than his half-hearted coping and my stubborn clinging. My heart ached like knives cutting into it, yet in the end, I still nodded heavily. Strangers passing on the road, best never to meet again, best never to have known each other. When I opened my eyes again, I realized I had been reborn, returned to the very day the Harris family was about to go bankrupt. In those final moments, Daniel's dry, bony hand had gripped my wrist with a strength that didn't belong to someone at death's door. In his clouded eyes, the calm he had carried for 35 years was gone. All that was left was release, almost desperate and stubborn pleading. "In the next life, let's just be strangers passing on the road, forgetting each other in the crowd." I froze, as though an invisible hand had clamped down on my chest, pain so sharp I could hardly breathe. I knew perfectly well who he was thinking of. For more than 35 years he had never once forgotten Linda Moon, the woman who had abandoned him for love, only to die in exile. When news of her death reached him more than 25 years ago, his soul had withered too. The man by my side might have seemed like the perfect husband in everyone else's eyes, but his heart had long belonged to that unreachable woman. I looked at the man I had clung to for my entire life, an empty shell, and nodded firmly. Strangers passing on the road, best never to meet again, best never to have known each other. Then I opened my eyes. Blinding sunlight struck me straight on. I sat up, staring at my smooth, delicate hands free of wrinkles, then looked around the familiar girlish bedroom I had lived in before marriage. From downstairs came the muffled sound of conversation. My heart pounded violently with dread. I stumbled to the corner of the second-floor staircase and looked down. My father sat at the head of the living room, his face somber. Across from him was Mr. Harris, Daniel's father, his expression haggard and worried. Behind him stood a thin young man in a faded, well-worn shirt. He was lanky but straight-backed, his entire presence steeped in gloom. It was Daniel, only 19 years old. I remembered clearly. Today was the day the Harris family was about to collapse. Cornered, Mr. Harris had brought his son here to beg my father for an investment. In my past life, my heart had softened when I saw the pride and silent suffering in that young man's eyes. I had cried and begged my father to help them. The large sum from the Johnson family not only saved the Harrises, but also paved the golden path for Daniel's future career. And what did I get in return? 35 years of his indifference, and at the end, words sharp as knives. Strangers passing on the road. Rage surged inside me like fire. I took a deep breath, slipped on my slippers, and walked steadily downstairs. My father looked at me in surprise. "Emily, why are you coming down here?" Mr. Harris forced a strained smile to please me. "Ah, it's been years since I last saw you. You've grown up so much." "Beautiful, isn't it?" Only Daniel Harris said nothing. He merely glanced at me quickly, those handsome but overly calm eyes completely devoid of emotion, before lowering his head again. The indifference in his look was cold, aloof, almost arrogant, as though he were just an outsider. In my previous life, it was that very mix of stubborn pride and fragile weakness that pierced my heart. But now, all I felt was a heavy weight pressing down on me. I ignored it. Mr. Harris stepped right up to my father and linked arms with him, his voice not loud but clear. "Brother, don't meddle in other people's business." My father froze. The smile on Mr. Harris's face stiffened as well. I clearly saw Daniel's hand hanging loosely at his side, suddenly clenched tight, veins standing out. I spoke again, my voice like ice. "Some people, no matter how much you help them, even if you tear your heart out for them, will never remember your kindness. In the end, they only resent you, saying you're nothing but a burden in their way, so why help them at all? Money in our family doesn't just blow in from the wind. Emily, my father growled my name, though he wasn't truly angry. But Mr. Harris's face had gone utterly pale, his lips trembling, unable to form words. The fatal blow, however, came from Daniel himself. He jerked his head up as if stabbed by something sharp. Those eyes of his, usually calm as still water, were suddenly filled with shock, confusion, and even a kind of shame. He looked as though my words had struck him right in the heart, unbelievable and unbearable. He couldn't seem to fathom that I would ever say something so harsh. I met his gaze head-on, my own heart cold and steady. "What are you staring at, Daniel Harris? Just as you wished, this time I won't serve you. The path to your glory and your precious first love, you walk it yourself. As for us, strangers passing on the road." The living room turned so cold it seemed one could wring water from the air. Mr. Harris's face shifted from pale to a bruised purple, like raw liver. He jabbed a finger at me, stammering, "You," but could not finish a single coherent sentence. Perhaps in his entire life he had never been humiliated so badly by a junior. My father, seasoned as he was, quickly smoothed things over. He poured tea and began to see the guests out. "Mr. Harris, children may speak harshly, but she isn't wrong, and my family is struggling too. We simply don't have the means." Those words were the final judgment. The light in Mr. Harris's eyes went out completely. His shoulders slumped, and in an instant he seemed to age 10 years. He opened his mouth but at last could only sigh heavily, pulling on Daniel's arm. "Let's go." Daniel, jolted by the tug, finally came back to himself. Before turning away, he shot me one last look, eyes burning with shame and fury, as though my refusal to help wasn't because of circumstances, but a deliberate attack to disgrace him. He pressed his lips tightly together, said nothing, and followed his father out. His back was straight, radiating a kind of stubborn defiance, born of poverty. I watched their figures fade beyond the doorway. My arm slipped a little from where I had been clutching my father's, cold sweat breaking out across my back. Just now, I had relied on the bitterness of a past life to force myself into that moment of defiance. "Emily," my father pulled me down to sit, frowning slightly. "What's gotten into you today? Did you take the wrong medicine? Not long ago you were praising that boy's talent." I leaned back into the soft sofa, breathing in the comforting scent that always put me at ease in this home. Countless words swelled up inside me, but none I could say aloud. How could I possibly tell him, "Father, I've already died once. I served him for 35 years, only to hear him say, 'In the next life, let's never meet again'?" Who would believe that? Instead, I wrapped my arms around his and acted spoiled, letting the moment pass as if everything were perfectly natural. "Besides, Father, just look at him. His face is so dark and gloomy. Does he look like someone who knows how to repay kindness? If we help him, we might just be raising an enemy." My words made my father chuckle. He tapped me lightly on the forehead. "You're just making excuses. But fine, if you say we won't help, then we won't help." Then he looked at me thoughtfully. "I just didn't expect. My little princess can judge people pretty well. That boy's eyes really do hold something deep. His thoughts aren't simple." I could only smile bitterly inside. It wasn't that I was good at judging people. It was that I had paid the price of a lifetime to finally see him clearly. From that day forward, I started consciously following news about the Harris family. As expected, once they lost the Johnsons, their last lifeline, their bankruptcy went quickly. The villa, the cars, the company, one after another, everything was auctioned off to pay debts. All the burden fell squarely on Daniel's shoulders. He had to quit school, running everywhere to find work and odd jobs, struggling to carry a family, teetering on the edge of collapse. In my previous life, at this very time, I had knelt before my father, begging him to secretly arrange a comfortable, well-paid job for Daniel. That way he could support his family while still continuing his studies. With his talent and my family's money, he never truly had to taste the cruelty of life, even in hardship. But this time, without my intervention, he really did slam headfirst into the cold, iron wall of reality. A teenager with nothing but talent and pride, no backing, no connections. In this pragmatic society, every step was painfully difficult. Now and then, my subordinates reported little things. That he got cheated out of his pay while tutoring, that he was mocked for his looks when he tried playing piano, that he worked as a porter but was too weak to earn much. Hearing these scraps of news stirred no ripple in my heart. This was the life he had longed for. A life without me, without my family interfering. Daniel Harris, let's see how long you and your precious Linda Moon can endure against such a brutal reality. Not long after, I heard news of her, Linda Moon. As expected, she appeared. After I deliberately arranged for someone to happen to introduce Daniel to a menial job sorting old books in a second-hand shop for low wages, Linda arrived in his life like a gentle breeze. They said she often passed by the shop on rainy days, handing him an umbrella. They said she would bring along homemade lunches, plain in taste, and share half with him because she couldn't finish. They said she looked at him with clear, deer-like eyes, admiration shining as she said, "Daniel, you know so much, you're sure to succeed one day." Such small acts of warmth, even tinged with charity, might have meant little to the Daniel of my past life, the boy I had cushioned in silk and velvet. But to the Daniel of now, a boy sinking into the mud, crushed and nearly broken by life, those crumbs of sweetness became rays of light, saving his darkened world. He was instantly ensnared. He saw Linda Moon as light in his darkness, as hope in his despair. All the coldness and indifference he had given me for 35 years in our past life, he now poured out as blazing passion and dependence on her. I looked at the photo my people had sent me. In a narrow, shabby alley, Daniel cradled a lunchbox carefully in his arms, lowering his head toward the girl in a white dress beside him, his gaze soft and devoted, the kind of gaze I had never once received in my entire past life. The sunset stretched long, casting their shadows together. They really did look a bit like a pair of tragic lovebirds, bound by fate. I set the photo down and took a sip of the coffee on the table. It had gone lukewarm, leaving only a bitter edge. Daniel Harris, you've finally gotten what you wanted. Your bright moon, your savior, is now completely yours. Go on, savor your so-called pure love, free of money and interests. I just wonder, when love collides with the grind of food, clothing, and shelter, when romance crashes headlong into poverty, will that bright moon of yours still shine enough to light up this muddy life? My lips curved faintly, though no smile reached my eyes. Soon after, when I saw Daniel's love-struck expression in the photo, that exaggerated look of a man who had found his one true love, the little irritation in my chest faded away. Fine. Let that shameless couple lock themselves together. Just don't come back to disturb me again. In my past life, I must have been blind, throwing away my place as a rich daughter to play nanny, raising another man until I ended up raising a white-eyed wolf. This lifetime, I'll pass. I crumpled the stack of photos into shreds and tossed them straight into the trash, then turned and went to find my father. He was in the study, reviewing reports. When he saw me storming in, he pushed his glasses up his nose. Well, what new orders does my little princess have for me today?" I braced my hands on his desk and went straight to the point. "Father, I've thought it through. I'm tired of just playing around. I want to learn business from you." My father nearly dropped his glasses. "Huh? What brought this on all of a sudden? Don't tell me it's because of that Harris boy." "It has nothing to do with him." I cut him off immediately, waving my hand as though to shoo away something unpleasant. "I just think relying on others will never compare to relying on myself. People's hearts are unpredictable. Today they say they love you, tomorrow they can say, let's just be strangers passing by. But money and ability in my own hands, no one can take those away." My father stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing, satisfaction in every line of his face. Good. My daughter has finally grown up, fine. Tomorrow, come with me to the company. Start from the basics. Whatever you want to learn, I'll teach you everything. Once you succeed, you'll inherit it all." Excitement stirred in me. In my last life, because I had spent myself serving the entire Harris family, I had completely wasted what little business instinct I possessed. This time, I was determined to reclaim it. The next day, I followed my father to the company. I didn't put on any airs of a pampered heiress. I simply asked the secretary to show me around the different departments so I could observe how everything operated. People were curious about why I had suddenly changed so drastically, but no one dared to ask too much. The truth was, after escaping the haze of blind romance, my mind was far clearer. Combined with what I knew from my previous life about future industry trends, I was even able to offer my father a few small suggestions. He listened in surprise and praised me for my forward thinking. The days became full and busy, so much so that I almost forgot all about that man named Daniel Harris. Until one day, when I went to an upscale mall to check on the newly opened counter for our brand, I was talking with the assistant my father had assigned me when, out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of two all too familiar faces. It was Daniel Harris and Linda Moon. Daniel wore faded jeans and an old t-shirt, carrying a ragged canvas bag. His face looked even more haggard than the last time I saw him, his brows drawn together, his whole body exuding exhaustion, crushed under the weight of life. Beside him stood Linda Moon, still in her signature white dress, though the fabric was obviously cheap. She clung to his arm, her eyes glowing brightly as she stared at an outrageously expensive designer handbag behind the glass. She shook his arm and whined, "Daniel. Daniel, don't you think that bag is beautiful? My best friend's boyfriend bought it for her as a gift." Daniel's face immediately became terribly awkward. His lips moved, his voice dry. "Linda, that's really expensive. Wait until later, everything is always later with you." Linda Moon pouted, jerking her hand out of his. Her eyes reddened. "I've never asked for anything from you. I just want a little sincerity. Is that so hard?" Daniel stood there helpless, his complexion shifting between pale and flushed. People around them had begun to glance over. I nearly burst out laughing. So this was his bright moon, the pure one untouched by dust? Now even she was demanding sincerity. Though that kind of sincerity clearly didn't come cheap. I couldn't be bothered to watch the pitiful show any longer and was about to turn away. But perhaps because I was dressed so formally that day, with an assistant at my side and an air of authority about me, Daniel happened to look up and saw me. His gaze froze, filled with surprise, embarrassment, and a touch of inferiority he couldn't conceal in the face of such stark contrast. He probably hadn't expected that the Johnson heiress, who once had feelings for him, would not only remain unscathed after leaving him, but would shine even brighter, radiant in her life. The difference between us was like heaven and earth. Linda Moon followed his gaze and looked over at me as well. In her eyes, I instantly caught a flicker of wariness and the faintest trace of envy. I gave them a slight nod in greeting, then decisively turned my back and walked away without lingering a single second. Even as I walked farther off, I could faintly hear Linda's teary voice. "Who is she? Why were you looking at her like that? You're tired of me already, aren't you?" And Daniel's voice, forced calm but edged with irritation, trying to soothe her. "No, don't overthink it. She's just someone who doesn't matter." I gave a short, cold laugh. "Not related. The two of you go right on playing your little drama of related. I have no time to keep you company. My new life has only just begun." From that encounter at the mall onward, I pushed those pitiful lovebirds completely out of my sight and my mind. Out of sight, out of mind. My own life was like a fish returning to water, like a kite soaring with the wind. Following my father's guidance, I realized just how wasted my old life had been. Making money was far more interesting than guessing at Daniel's perpetually cold expression. Using the foresight I possessed, I discreetly suggested to my father a few directions for investment, from promising new districts to small but high-potential tech companies. At first he was half doubtful, but he tried investing a little, and within a short time he saw results that thrilled him. Everywhere he went, he bragged that I was his lucky treasure. I was just as busy, learning management, reviewing projects, running around every day until I was dizzy. But my heart was deeply satisfied. Even my health improved. When friends saw me, they said I looked like a different person, eyes bright and alive. From time to time, I still heard scraps of news about Daniel Harris and Linda Moon through various sources. I heard that they had really moved in together, renting a dilapidated house where the wind whistled through in winter and the roof leaked in summer. I heard Daniel was working 3 jobs at once, by day a sales clerk, by evening singing in a bar, and past midnight translating documents for hire. All to save enough money to buy Linda a dress she fancied, a dress whose fabric looked cheap to me even at first glance. I heard Linda spent her days complaining about being tired, about low wages, about never finding a job she liked. In the end, she simply stayed home, claiming she was dedicating herself to taking care of Daniel. But the meals she cooked came out half raw or mushy, the household chores were a mess, and she still whined constantly about her rough hands. She even complained about the rising costs of electricity and water. Just hearing it all made me feel exhausted on Daniel's behalf. So this was the pure love. He had thrown away a mountain of gold for the 35 years of devotion I had given him. Now every day he was drained by bills, by endless trivial chores with no time left for romance or dreams. Day after day, all of that must have been worn away. Did he still have the time to remember his so-called talent and ideals, long buried by reality? Did he still have the strength to hold on to that pride and arrogance he once carried? No. I didn't pity him. This was the path he had chosen for himself. In fact, I even felt a trace of satisfaction, curious to see how long that grand love of his would last. That day, I represented my father in negotiating a partnership. The other company was powerful, and my father wanted me to gain more experience. With my assistant at my side and heels clicking confidently, I walked into their conference room. But when I opened the door, the person sitting in the chairman's seat across the table was not their general manager, but a young man who looked oddly familiar. His face was sharply defined, every feature chiseled, his gaze cold and piercing. He wore a tailored black suit without a tie, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, looking casual yet commanding. When he lifted his head, his eyes lingered on me for 2 seconds, cool and assessing. It clicked in my mind almost instantly. This was Alexander Foster, the crown prince of the Foster family. Young but ruthless, a man whose word was law. Even the seasoned old foxes of my father's generation tread carefully around him. In my previous life, I had never interacted with him directly, but his reputation thundered in my ears like a storm. I hadn't expected to encounter him so early in this life, and in such a situation. I immediately regained my composure, put on a professional smile, and walked forward. Vice President Foster, I'm here representing Johnson Corporation. Alexander gave the slightest nod, motioning for me to sit. Every movement of his carried a natural dominance. The meeting began, and I focused all my attention. This project was too important for our family to risk mistakes. When it came to dividing profits, tension rose on both sides. I laid out clear reasoning, presenting market analyses and highlighting our advantages with precise logic. Alexander remained silent, tapping a finger lightly on the table, seemingly distracted. Then when I finished, he suddenly lifted his gaze and stared at me. "Miss Johnson," he said, "you're far more interesting than the rumors. Not like the kind of heiress who only knows how to shop and drink tea." His words didn't sound like a compliment so much as a probe. I maintained my polite smile. "Vice President, you flatter me. Rumors can't be trusted. It's better we focus on the project at hand." The corner of his lips curved, though he said nothing more. But from that moment on, his attitude in the negotiations grew noticeably more serious. Many of the conditions we reached in the end were even better than my father had expected. I felt a spark of pride. Clearly, I had learned quite a bit during this time. When the meeting wrapped up, I stood to leave, but Alexander suddenly called after me. "Miss Johnson." I turned. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze tinged with amusement. "Next time, I hope you'll be the one to negotiate again. Compared to the old veterans around your father, talking with you is much more pleasant." "Thank you for your confidence, Vice President Foster," I replied evenly. "I'll be sure to relay your words to my father." This man was exactly as the rumors described, arrogant, unwilling to follow the rules. My assistant and I left the Foster building, and my mood was surprisingly good, not only because the negotiations had succeeded, but because of a feeling I couldn't quite put into words, as though something was beginning to shift. What I didn't realize was that as I walked out of that building, confident and radiant, somewhere else in the city, Daniel Harris had just been scolded harshly by his boss for losing a major order. The meager bonus he was supposed to receive was completely docked. He dragged his weary steps out of the company. The sky was overcast, as though it was about to rain. In his pocket was a slip of paper Linda Moon had stuffed into his hand that morning, with the name of a bakery on it. She wanted a small pastry from there, something that cost as much as his entire day's meals. He stood on the busy sidewalk, watching well-dressed strangers come and go. For the first time, he realized clearly that between him and me, Emily Johnson, were two entirely different worlds. That crushing sense of disparity hit him like a sudden downpour of icy rain. Day by day, I stayed busy learning business from my father. The project with Alexander Foster was progressing smoothly. Although Alexander was sharp-tongued and difficult, his efficiency was unmatched. Working with him was actually manageable, as long as one could keep up with his pace. In my spare moments, I occasionally heard snippets of news about Daniel from others, treating them only as passing amusements. I heard that life hadn't been easy for him lately. His job carried enormous pressure, the targets were strict, and with his quiet, unsociable personality that never catered to clients, his performance was abysmal. Every day, he was reprimanded. Meanwhile, Linda Moon gave him no peace either. Apparently their landlord had raised the rent, and with both their incomes combined, they still couldn't cover it. The two had fought bitterly, and Linda, in her fury, returned to her parents' home. Though her family wasn't well off either, at least she didn't have to pay rent. With no other options, Daniel swallowed his pride and went around borrowing money, only to be rejected by everyone. When I heard this, I was looking over a report on my computer. My heart didn't stir in the slightest. In fact, I even found it funny. So much for true love. Even a few $100s in rent was enough to shatter it. That afternoon, I was in a meeting with Mr. Lee, my father's longtime head of marketing, discussing strategies for launching a new brand campaign. Mr. Lee was very experienced, though sometimes his thinking was a bit conservative. Drawing on faint memories from my previous life about creative marketing trends, I proposed a rather bold online campaign. Mr. Lee frowned and waved a hand. "Miss, this is too risky. The costs are high, and there's no guarantee it'll be effective. It doesn't sound reliable." I was just about to continue persuading him when my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I gestured for Mr. Lee to wait and stepped aside to answer. "Hello?" The other end was silent for a few seconds. Then a hoarse male voice came through, awkward and strained. "Emily Johnson." I froze at the sound. It was Daniel Harris. Why on earth was he calling me? In all our lives, we had barely spoken to each other. "What is it?" I asked coldly. He hesitated, as though the words were stuck in his throat. His breathing was heavy, and the noise in the background suggested he was out on the street. After a long pause, as if summoning all his courage, he blurted out quickly, as though afraid he would change his mind. I ran into some urgent trouble and need to borrow a little money. Not much. Just $5,000. I'll definitely pay you back next month when I get my salary." For a moment, I almost thought I had misheard him. This was the man who had once been so proud, so stubborn, who would rather starve than bow his head. And now he was calling me to borrow money, and not even for himself, but to patch up that tangled mess of so-called pure love he clung to. I could practically picture his face right then, humiliated, furious, yet forced to bend under reality. Inside I laughed coldly, though outwardly I feigned surprise. Oh dear, what a coincidence. I'm strapped for cash myself these days. I just poured all my spare money into a new investment project. Not a penny left in hand. That was the truth. I really had invested all of my allowance into a small company I believed had potential. On the other end of the line, there was a pause, clear as day. He hadn't expected me to reject him so firmly. He must have thought that since we had once known each other, at the very least I would hesitate or feign concern. But I refused to play along with his script. "Oh, right," I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me, my tone as light as a breeze. "Why don't you ask Linda Moon? You two are so in love, aren't you? Since you've been suffering for her sake, surely she wouldn't just stand by when you're in trouble." That sentence landed like a needle, stabbing straight into his sorest wound. The other end fell completely silent, dead still. All I could hear was his heavy, labored breathing. A few seconds later, he ground out one bitter sentence. "Sorry to bother you." Then click, the line went dead. I looked at the blank screen and let out a cold laugh. Couldn't handle just that? This was only the beginning. I put my phone away and returned to the meeting room. Mr. Lee was still frowning. "Miss, this proposal really is too risky." I pulled up my chair and sat down, my gaze firm. The market has changed. Not daring to take risks is the biggest risk of all. I believe this plan is viable. If there's a problem, I'll take responsibility. Mr. Lee stared at me, clearly stunned by the unexpected force in my words. The memory of that phone call lingered in my mind, making my voice even calmer. Or do you mean to say our Johnson family no longer has the courage to try? He opened his mouth but in the end only sighed. All right, we'll do it your way. See, Daniel Harris? Without you, not only am I living better, I can make my own decisions, even make others follow my lead. As for your troubles, they're not worth even a brief interruption in my work. Stay in your mud, clinging to your moonlight for warmth. The only question is, how long can that warmth last? After I firmly pushed through that advertising plan, Mr. Lee still had his doubts but carried it out obediently. And the result? Boom. The campaign exploded online and offline. Sales skyrocketed like a rocket. My father was so delighted he sang my praises at the board meeting. Mr. Lee, seeing me afterward, greeted me with a grin as wide as a sunflower, never again mentioning the words, too risky. The feeling was intoxicating, 100 times sweeter than in my past life, when I was stuck in the kitchen simmering soup for Daniel Harris, waiting for him to come home. Because of the project, I found myself crossing paths with Alexander Foster more often. He was as difficult as ever, demanding, sharp-tongued, cutting through conversation like a knife without sparing anyone's feelings. But he had one redeeming quality. He was scrupulously professional, with extraordinary ability. As long as your plan was solid, he would support it to the end. Gradually, I grew used to his style. That day, after another meeting at Foster Corporation, Alexander suddenly stopped me as I was leaving. There's an industry banquet tonight. Quite a few investors will be there. Interested? I froze for a moment. Why would he think to invite me to something like that? Vice President Foster, He shot me a glance, his voice as disagreeable as ever. Take you along to broaden your horizons. Otherwise, when you go negotiate deals later, you'll get swindled and help them count the money. If you don't want to go, I'll invite someone else. I agreed at once. Only a fool would turn down an opportunity like this to expand my network. That evening, I changed into a well-fitted cocktail dress, applied careful makeup, and arrived on my own at the venue. Alexander had already arrived, surrounded by people as if he were a star shining in the night sky. When he saw me, he raised his glass from a distance in greeting. I picked up a glass of wine and stood nearby, listening to conversations about the industry. Every now and then, I joined in with a few remarks. To my surprise, I was actually able to keep up. A few of the industry veterans showed interest in me, asking which family I belonged to. When they heard I was the Johnson family's daughter, everyone looked a little surprised. They probably hadn't expected that the Johnson heiress wasn't just a decorative vase. As I was speaking with them, I suddenly realized that Alexander Foster had slipped free of the crowd and come to stand beside me. My performance must have been passable, since I hadn't embarrassed myself. Out of nowhere, he dropped a remark that sounded almost like praise. I couldn't help feeling amused and a little helpless. Thank you for the compliment, Vice President Foster. He swirled his wine glass, eyes scanning the room, then suddenly lowered his voice and leaned toward me. See the man in the blue suit? That's Mr. Wong from the construction materials industry. He looks respectable, but he's a lecher. Stay away from him. I froze for a moment. He was warning me. And that woman in the red dress, she's CEO Lee's secretary. Can't keep her mouth shut. Don't share anything important with her. He went on, pointing out a few more people, both reliable and dangerous. The amount of information was overwhelming. I blinked, confused. Vice President Foster, why are you telling me all this? He gave me a sidelong glance, his tone utterly matter-of-fact. So you don't act stupid, fall into traps, and drag down the project we're working on. Fine. He was sharp-tongued, but not wrong. Honestly, I felt a strange flicker in my heart. His words were cutting, but his actions seemed almost considerate. When the banquet was nearly over, I slipped away to the restroom. As I turned a corner in the hallway afterward, I couldn't believe my eyes. I ran straight into Daniel Harris. He wore a server's uniform, carrying an empty tray. Clearly, he was working here. The moment he saw me, dressed elegantly and glowing with confidence, his eyes contracted sharply. His reflex was to turn away. What a small world. Fate throwing us into each other's path again. I hadn't planned to pay him any attention and walked straight ahead, But then I overheard one of the other servers beside him whisper with admiration, "Wow, was that the eldest daughter of the Johnson family just now? She's so beautiful, such presence. I heard she's really capable now, helping her father manage the company." Daniel lowered his head, silent, his face rigid. His fingers clenched the edge of the tray so tightly, his knuckles turned white. I didn't slow down. Inside, I felt nothing. The girl he once had to look up to was still someone he had to look up to. And he no longer even had the qualifications to stand on equal footing with me for a conversation. When I stepped out of the hallway, I found Alexander Foster leaning casually at the exit, as though waiting for me. His eyes flicked past me, taking in the scene behind, then returned to mine with the faintest crease of his brow. "You know him?" His voice was indifferent. I shrugged. "No, just someone unimportant." Alexander gave a short, cold laugh, asked nothing further, and said naturally, "Let's go. I'll take you home." "That's not necessary, Vice President Foster. My driver's already on the way." He cut me off, already turning to leave. I watched his tall, steady back, and for some reason, a faint, strange feeling rose in me. A man like Alexander Foster wasn't as unbearable as I had thought. He had meant what he said about it being on his way. His car drove me straight to my doorstep. When I got out, he didn't say much, just gave a small nod. The window rolled up, and the sleek black sedan sped away. I stood there for a moment, watching the taillights disappear into the night, feeling something I couldn't quite put into words. Alexander Foster always did things in a way that caught people off guard. But I didn't dwell on it. I turned back inside and buried myself in work again. After the success of the marketing campaign, my father trusted me with even more responsibilities. I was so busy my feet barely touched the ground. Meetings, evaluations, client visits, never enough hours in the day. Now and then, when I finally had a spare moment to scroll through social media, I would come across Linda Moon's posts, dripping with jealousy. Her posts went on about how love couldn't fill a stomach but could soothe hunger, or how she envied princesses who were born lucky. Each one came with oddly angled selfies, the shabby rented room faintly visible in the background. I scrolled past them without a second thought. If she wanted to make vague insinuations, let her. Since she wasn't naming names, I couldn't be bothered to claim them. As for Daniel Harris, it was as if he had vanished entirely from my world. Ever since that phone call, he had never contacted me again. How he eventually scraped together enough money to pay the rent, I had no idea. Probably by wringing himself dry with more exhausting, low-paying jobs. That day, I represented the company in negotiating a critical supply contract. The partner's CEO was difficult, nitpicking every detail until my throat was dry. Only after much effort did we finally reach the last stage, both sides agreeing to the terms and preparing to sign a letter of intent. Just then, a knock came at the meeting room door. An assistant poked his head in, looking uneasy. "President Wong, there's someone downstairs named Daniel Harris. Says he's an employee of our company, insists on seeing you, says it's urgent." President Wong frowned. Clearly, the name meant nothing to him. "Can't you see I'm in the middle of an important meeting? Tell him to wait." My heart gave a faint stir. Daniel Harris? What was he doing here? The assistant hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "He said he secured a huge order, but the client demands the president's personal signature or they'll cancel. He seems very anxious. He's drenched in sweat." President Wong looked half skeptical, but the words "huge order" clearly tempted him. He turned to me apologetically. "President Johnson, perhaps I should." I smiled lightly, raising my teacup. "Please take care of it first, President Wong. I'm not in a rush." President Wong hurried out. I walked to the window and looked down. Sure enough, there was Daniel, standing at the gate in a cheap, ill-fitting suit, clutching a folder tight in his hands, pacing back and forth. His expression was drawn, worry etched deep, with a desperate glimmer of hope. After a while, President Wong came down. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see the shift in Wong's expression, from doubt to impatience, and finally to outright anger. He snatched the folder from Daniel's hands, flipped through a few pages, then threw it back at him. Papers scattered everywhere. Daniel stood frozen, his face instantly bloodless. President Wong jabbed a finger at him, clearly shouting insults. Though I couldn't hear them, they were certainly not kind. At last, Wong stormed back into the building, leaving Daniel alone among the mess of papers, looking like a puppet with all its strings cut. I could guess the situation. In his desperation to prove himself, Daniel had either been tricked or badly misjudged things, bringing a completely unfeasible order to the president. The result was slamming headfirst into a wall. Just then, my phone buzzed. A WeChat message from Alexander Foster. Negotiation finished yet? I'm at the cafe across the street. Come over, we need to discuss the new quarterly budget. I drew back my gaze, no longer sparing Daniel another look, and quickly replied, on my way. I picked up my bag, politely nodded to the partner's assistant, and said, please pass on my regards to President Wong. I have another matter to attend to. My secretary will follow up on the contract details. Leaving the meeting room, I took the elevator down. At the first-floor lobby, Daniel and I crossed paths as I stepped out. He didn't seem to see me at all. His eyes were vacant, his hair disheveled, his suit wrinkled beyond saving. His suit still bore smudges from the papers that had been scattered earlier. I didn't stop, just walked straight out toward the brilliant sunlight outside. Across the street, Alexander Foster's sleek black sports car was parked, gleaming. He leaned lazily against the door, sunglasses on, drawing glances from passers-by. When he saw me step out, he tilted his chin in a subtle signal. In that moment, behind me was Daniel Harris, desperate, humiliated, plunged into ruin. Before me was Alexander Foster, embodying endless possibilities and light. The contrast was cruel, yet exhilarating. I smiled and strode across the street toward the new world, a world full of hope. As for Daniel Harris, who cared? After we finished discussing the quarterly budget at the cafe, Alexander made up an excuse to go over details again and pushed me into having dinner with him. He never let himself come out at a loss. But dining with him was worthwhile. I learned a lot. His words were sharp, but his insights were piercing. A few offhand remarks from him opened my eyes in ways I hadn't expected. When dinner ended, he drove me home. The car stopped at the gates of my family's estate. I stepped out and thanked him. He lowered the window, resting his elbow casually on the frame, and suddenly said, there's a gathering at the writing club next weekend. All the top investors in the industry will be there. Want to come? My eyes lit up. Of course I want to. I'll come pick you up then. He smirked, raised his window, and the black sedan roared off. My mood was light as I turned toward the house, only to almost bump into someone. Oh, the person flinched in surprise. I froze too. It was Uncle Zhang, the man who usually handled the shopping for our household. Miss, you're back, he said, patting his chest in relief, grocery basket still in hand. Just now, when I came back, I saw a stranger hanging around outside the neighborhood. Standing there in the rain, staring blankly, it scared me half to death. My chest tightened. What kind of person? A young man. Handsome, I suppose, but he didn't look well. His clothes didn't match this neighborhood at all. Uncle Zhang shook his head. I asked who he was looking for, but he wouldn't say, just stood there staring at our gate. Gave me the chills. I already had a good guess who it was. Daniel Harris. What was he doing at my door? Putting on a soulful gaze? Reliving old memories? Irritation welled up in me. I'm fine, Uncle Zhang. Probably just someone who got lost. From now on, if you see strangers lingering nearby, call security right away. I gave the instruction, then went inside. I hadn't expected that 2 days later, while I was having afternoon tea with a socialite friend, she would bring up Daniel again. Hey, she said, eyes sparkling with gossip. Guess who I saw the other day? Daniel Harris. You know, the guy who used to chase after you. Didn't his family go bankrupt? She clicked her tongue twice. I saw him sitting alone in some cheap cafe, with an old laptop in front of him. He looked gloomy. I overheard people at the next table saying he was trying to start some little project on his own, looking for investors. But nobody's interested. He's been turned down everywhere. She eyed me curiously. Come to think of it, didn't his family once come to your house asking for help? If your father had helped them back then, maybe his life would be different now. I slowly sipped my black tea, my tone calm. Maybe, but helping is kindness, not helping is duty. If he lacks the ability, he can't blame anyone else. My friend nodded, agreeing. True enough. Still, what a pity. I heard he used to have good grades. He did have talent. Talent? I set my teacup down. Plenty of people have talent. But without opportunity, without resources, without vision, talent just rots away in the mud. In my past life, if it hadn't been for the Johnson family backing him with everything we had, how could Daniel Harris have ever sailed so smoothly? Now that there was no one propping him up, where was all that so-called talent? Showing itself in juggling 3 jobs at once just to scrape together rent money? That night when I got home, my friend's words still drifted through my mind. Not with pity, but with a kind of irony. As I opened my email to deal with some work, I noticed a message from an anonymous sender. It was a request for advice about the risks of investing in a startup project. The questions were well framed, showing the writer had done some serious research, though the direction was a bit off and lacked real-world experience. For some reason, almost against my better judgment, I replied. I kept it brief, pointing out a few key issues and potential risks, nothing more. The moment I hit send, I felt a flicker of regret. Why had I interfered in someone else's business? I hadn't expected to receive a reply the very next day. The tone of the response was overflowing with emotion and respect, full of thanks, saying my guidance had been like a sudden revelation that helped him avoid a major trap. He even asked if he could continue seeking advice. Staring at the email, I felt an odd sensation creeping over me. Could this anonymous person actually be Daniel Harris? Cornered, desperate, and by sheer accident reaching out to me, his former girlfriend, for help? The thought was almost laughable. I could practically picture his face as he stared at his computer screen, reading my reply, expression caught between gratitude and confusion, as if he had just stumbled upon a treasure. Maybe he was even wondering why this anonymous investor was so sharp, able to pinpoint the problem at a glance. And maybe, just maybe, in that fleeting moment, he remembered there had once been someone who had done exactly that for him. Analyzing every risk, clearing every obstacle, laying the path at his feet. The image made me laugh out loud. Oh, Daniel Harris, so now you finally get a taste of regret? But this is only the beginning. With a decisive flick of my mouse, I dragged his email into the trash. No more questions. The guiding light you once relied on has long since gone dark. After that gathering at the writing club, Alexander Foster started seeking me out noticeably more often, always with some excuse. A shipment of sample wines from Bordeaux had arrived. Too dull to taste alone, so why not try them with him? A tech forum's keynote speaker was droning on endlessly. Could I take notes for him? A round of golf with no one to pick up balls? Was his vice president's assistant just for decoration? But I had to admit, every event he took me to was high class. The people I met and the information I gained were things I could never have reached so easily on my own. For the sake of my career, I endured it, treating it as borrowing his network and resources. And Alexander Foster himself, over time I discovered that while his mouth was sharp, he wasn't actually a bad person. At least with his partners, he was fair, never stingy with resources when they were deserved. It was just that his attitude toward me was becoming harder and harder to read. Like today, he had called me, saying he wanted to see some art exhibition. I had no real interest in abstract paintings. To me, they were nothing but blobs of color that made me yawn. But Alexander studied them intently. Under the soft gallery lights, his profile even seemed a touch gentle. He suddenly pointed to a painting, a chaotic explosion of colors. "What do you think of this one?" I answered honestly, "I don't get it. Looks like someone just spilled a palette of paint." He let out a quiet laugh, his shoulders shaking slightly. His eyes glinting with humor. This painter's just good at acting mysterious to swindle money. "Then why drag me here?" I muttered. After the exhibition, Alexander Foster insisted on taking me to dinner. The restaurant was a rooftop venue that required reservations a month in advance, with a stunning view of the city's night skyline. Each dish was plated as delicately as a work of art. Alexander served me food and poured wine with an ease that felt practiced, as if he'd done it countless times before. I felt a little uneasy. "Vice President Foster, you're acting a bit different tonight." He lifted his eyes at me. "What, inviting you to dinner suddenly makes me strange? Is the great Miss Johnson really that hard to please?" "That's not what I meant," I stammered, caught off guard by his words. Halfway through the meal, he asked casually, as though it were small talk. "I heard there's some fool hanging around your house lately?" The knife in my hand paused mid-cut. His sources really were fast. Just an old classmate. He must not be thinking straight, I said lightly. Alexander gave a cold snort, his voice carrying an edge. Do you want me to take care of it? Make sure he doesn't have time for such daydreams anymore. I quickly shook my head. No, I can handle it myself. The last thing I wanted was to owe him that kind of favor. He studied me for a moment, then said slowly, Fine, but if something happens, don't carry it all alone. His tone sounded almost concerned. My heart skipped a beat. I ducked my head and focused on eating. After dinner, he drove me home. When the car stopped, I unbuckled my seatbelt and thanked him. But he didn't immediately unlock the doors. Instead, he turned to look at me. In the dim interior, lit only by the dashboard glow, his eyes were deep and unreadable. Emily, he said, his voice lower than usual, what do you think of me? My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. Sirens blared in my mind. Vice President Foster, you're outstanding, sharp, capable, a wonderful business partner. He clicked his tongue, clearly unsatisfied. That's your official answer. I'm not asking as a businessman, I'm asking as a man. What do you think of me? There it was. I knew this dinner wouldn't be simple. My scalp tingled and I forced a smile. You really know how to joke. With someone like you, how could I dare to judge? Suddenly, he leaned in closer. A faint scent of cedar mixed with the warmth of wine surrounded me. Instinctively, I shrank back until my shoulder blades hit the car door. Do I look like I'm joking? He asked, eyes locked on me with a force that allowed no resistance. My heart thudded wildly, my palms growing damp. Wasn't this moving too fast? I hadn't even completely shed the shadows of my past life. Vice President Foster, I only want to focus on my career right now. I'm not ready to think about relationships. The words scraped their way out of me with effort. He held my gaze for several long seconds, then suddenly leaned back, his voice returning to its usual lazy drawl. All right, no rush. Go on, get inside. There's an auction this weekend. Make sure you clear your schedule. Relieved, I scrambled out of the car like I'd been pardoned, watching his vehicle disappear into the distance. My face burned hot. When Alexander Foster decided to make a move, he was far too direct, so direct it left no room to react. I patted my cheeks to calm myself and turned toward the house. But just as I reached the door, a shadow lunged out of the darkness, startling me so badly my heart jumped. Emily, the hoarse, ragged voice was Daniel Harris's. Looking closely, I saw he was even more haggard than the last time. His eyes were sunken, stubble covered his jaw, and his body reeked of cigarettes and despair. Why are you here again? I snapped, my brows knitting tight, irritation rising hot inside me. He stared at me, his eyes bloodshot, his voice thick with suppressed rage and unwillingness. Who was that man just now? Was it Alexander Foster? Are you two together? I snapped instantly. Who I'm with has nothing to do with you, Daniel Harris. Since when do you and I share that kind of closeness? His face went pale at my words, but he stubbornly blocked my way, his tone edged with near-mad desperation. It's because of him, isn't it? Because he has money, power, that's why? Emily, you weren't like this before. When did you become so materialistic? I couldn't help but laugh in fury. Materialistic? Who was the one who told me, go your way and I'll go mine? Who crushed everything I sacrificed for some so-called pure love? You've wasted your life for years, and now you see someone better at my side, so suddenly I'm the materialistic one? Daniel Harris, I said coldly, enunciating every word. Take that ridiculous reasoning and shove it. Who I am now has nothing to do with you. Instead of standing here lecturing me, maybe you should figure out how to earn more money. Then you can buy your non-materialistic love a slice of cake. Without sparing his wounded face another glance, I walked past him, punched in my passcode, and stepped into the house. Emily, listen to me. His hoarse voice was cut off as the door closed. I leaned back against the door, exhaling a long, weary breath. Just my luck. Alexander Foster had just made my heart race a little, and then this worthless man showed up to ruin my mood. But the more desperate Daniel acted, the clearer it became. He was starting to regret everything. Too bad it was far too late. My market was thriving. I had no time to waste on a junk stock plunging into worthlessness. After that night when Daniel lost control outside my house, he seemed to vanish. Perhaps what little pitiful pride he had left was crushed by my words. I, on the other hand, felt peaceful, free to focus on my work and on handling Alexander Foster's increasingly unrestrained advances. That weekend, I still attended the auction with him. For all his arrogance, his eye for value was razor sharp. He won a pair of icy jade earrings, the stone as clear and luminous as water. When the auction ended, he handed me the velvet box. "Compensation," he said. I blinked. "Compensation for what?" "For scaring you last time." His tone was flat, as if he were handing out candy. "Keep them. They suit you." I stared at the expensive box in my hands, feeling like I was holding a hot potato. The gift was far too heavy. "Vice President Foster, this isn't appropriate." "Keep it," he interrupted, leaving no room for refusal. "Next time, just go fishing with me. That'll be repayment enough." He always had a way of justifying things. I was about to respond when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, though it looked vaguely familiar. I picked up. On the other end was a choked, frantic female voice. "Emily Johnson? Please save Daniel." I froze for a moment before recognizing the voice. It was Lily Moon. She had just called me Sister Emily and was begging me to help Daniel Harris. Had the sun risen in the west? Stepping aside, I answered coolly, "Lily Moon, you must have dialed the wrong number. Daniel and I don't know each other. I didn't call the wrong number." She sobbed louder, her voice breaking. "Only you can help us, please. Daniel, he borrowed from loan sharks to get money for my mother's surgery. The interest keeps piling up. There's no way we can pay it back. They've already come to the house and said they'll break his legs if he doesn't pay. We really have nowhere else to turn." Loan sharks? My brows furrowed tighter. Had Daniel Harris lost his mind, daring to get himself tangled in that mess? "Emily," Lily Moon sobbed, "please, just lend us a little money. For the sake of what you and he once had, I promise when we have it we'll pay you back. I'll work like a slave to repay your kindness if I have to." Her voice was hoarse from crying, but inside me, there wasn't a single ripple. If anything, I found it almost laughable. What feelings had ever truly existed between me and Daniel Harris? Only my one-sided sacrifices and his one-sided betrayal. My tone was icy. First, there is no relationship between me and Daniel to speak of. Second, he borrowed money for you, so that debt is yours to repay. Don't drag outsiders into it. Third, adults must take responsibility for their own choices. Sorry, but I won't interfere. I hung up immediately and, with a flick of my hand, blocked her number. Unbelievable. Just when I'd been in a good mood, it had to be ruined. Alexander Foster walked up, his brows drawn together. "That lingering ghost again?" I sighed, slipping my phone back into my bag. "Yeah, loan sharks are after him, and his girlfriend had the nerve to call me begging for help." Alexander let out a contemptuous laugh. "Pathetic. Do you need me to?" "No." I cut him off before he could finish. "Their mess has nothing to do with me. I don't want to get involved." He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Fine, let's go eat." I thought that was the end of it, but 2 days later, I stumbled upon a full-blown drama. I had just parked in the mall's garage when I heard furious shouting echoing from a side hallway. "Say that again." Daniel's voice was raw with rage and disbelief. "Your mother isn't even sick? You tricked me?" I had no choice." Lily's voice cracked as she cried and screamed. "That tiny salary of yours can't cover anything. I wanted that bag but didn't dare buy it. I just wanted a new phone, a trip somewhere nice. How was I supposed to know you'd actually borrow from loan sharks? Are you stupid?" "Stupid? I gave up my home, my schooling, even my pride for you. And now I'm drowning in debt because of you. And you admit it was all a lie, just for some cheap bag? Tell me, Lily, how am I supposed to keep living like this, in poverty, with you?" "I've had enough," she shrieked. "Every day it's bills, rent, utilities. Even buying a dress means waiting for your mood to improve. This isn't the life I want." A sharp crack echoed through the garage. I flinched, peeking around the corner. Daniel's whole body was trembling with rage, his hands still raised from the slap. Lily clutched her face, eyes wide in shock. "You hit me?" she spat, stunned. "Daniel Harris, how dare you? Who do you think you are? If my family hadn't pitied you, no one would have spared you a glance. A bankrupt failure, a useless man. What was I thinking, following you?" Daniel staggered back a step, like his soul had been ripped out, despair carved into every line of his face. "Get out," he rasped. Lily glared, her eyes blazing with hatred, before bursting into sobs and running off. Daniel stood frozen in place, like a hollow statue. Only after a long time did his shoulders collapse, and he dragged his feet away, his lonely figure looking as though it might shatter at any moment. I leaned against my car, quietly watching the entire scene. No gloating, no pity, just a calm sense that this was exactly how it was always going to end. Look at her, Daniel. This was your precious moonlight, the woman you threw everything away for, the one you clung to even at death's door. This was your pure love. And yet, strip away the shiny facade, and all that's left is unbearable selfishness and cheap deceit. Do you regret it now? Too late. I opened my car door. I slid into my car, started the engine, and drove away from that scene of chaos. In the rearview mirror, his desperate figure grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. His suffering had only just begun, while the bright days of my life still stretched out ahead of me. Lily Moon's slap seemed to have knocked out the last trace of spirit left in Daniel Harris. The loan sharks didn't care whether he'd been tricked or not. They showed up at his house day after day, blocking the door, smashing furniture, threatening to throw him into the river to feed the fish. He lost his job too, forced to scurry around like a rat hiding in the sewers. All these messy details I only ever heard secondhand, passed around like jokes. They said he was so desperate he even considered selling a kidney, only to find no connection willing to buy. I just shrugged when I heard it. No feelings stirred in me at all. Every blister on his feet came from the road he chose himself. Who could he blame? That night, I attended a charity gala on behalf of my family's company. These events, truthfully, were nothing more than gatherings where the wealthy spent money to buy reputation. But as my father always said, formalities had their place, and we had to play our part. I wore a champagne-colored evening gown with light makeup. The moment I stepped inside, I spotted the most striking figure in the crowd, Alexander Foster. As usual, a circle of people surrounded him, but he looked distracted, his eyes scanning the room. The moment he saw me, his gaze locked, and without hesitation he cut straight through the crowd toward me. "You're here," he said casually, as if it were the most natural thing, and handed me a glass of champagne. "Vice President," I murmured, accepting it with a trace of helplessness. He was growing bolder by the day. So much so that rumors had begun to spread that the heir of the Foster family was pursuing the eldest daughter of the Nguyen family. We had barely exchanged a few words when a commotion broke out at the entrance. Security seemed to be stopping someone. "Sir, please present your invitation." I'm here to see someone. I'm looking for Emily Johnson, the eldest daughter of the Nguyen family." The hoarse, desperate voice cut through the noise, tinged with the madness of someone with nothing left to lose. My stomach dropped. Impossible. I turned my head and sure enough there he was, Daniel Harris. I had no idea where he'd dug up that wrinkled, ill-fitting old suit. His hair was disheveled, his beard unkempt, his eyes bloodshot and feral. He shoved forward recklessly, ignoring the guards who held him back. The entire ballroom turned to stare, whispers rippling through the crowd. "Isn't that the Harris boy? My God! How could he have fallen this far? He's here looking for Emily? Are they still in touch?" My face went cold. What did he think he was doing? How had he even gotten this far inside? Alexander frowned and started forward, ready to intervene, but I caught his arm. "Let me handle this." I walked toward the entrance, heels clicking against the marble floor. The guards looked flustered. "Miss Nguyen, this man." I raised a hand to silence them, then fixed my gaze on Daniel, who looked half insane. "Daniel Harris, have you caused enough trouble? This is not a place for you." The moment he saw me, his eyes lit up like he'd just found a final straw to cling to. He shoved past the guards and stumbled right in front of me, his voice trembling so badly it nearly broke apart. Emily, I was wrong. I know I was wrong." He shouted so loud it was nearly a roar, drawing even more stares from the crowd. "I was blind. I was a bastard. I never should have betrayed you for Lily Moon. I never should have said those cruel words before I died." His words tumbled out chaotically, his face streaked with snot and tears, a pitiful wreck. Pathetic. He had the chance to start over, and yet he still chose the wrong path. This was his retribution, and he deserved it. With a dull thud, Daniel Harris dropped to his knees in front of me, clutching desperately at the hem of my gown. His expression was part repentance, part begging. Emily, please forgive me. Let's start over. I know you still remember what happened in our past life. We were husband and wife. We were together for 35 years. Give me one more chance, I beg you. The entire ballroom erupted into murmurs. People stood frozen, stunned by the bizarre scene before their eyes. Husband and wife in a past life? 35 years? Had Daniel gone insane? I stared down at him, so low and pitiful he was practically groveling in the dirt. Inside me, there wasn't the slightest tremor of emotion, only disgust and revulsion. Now he realized he was wrong. Now he remembered this so-called bond of 35 years. Where had that man been before? I yanked my gown free and stepped back, my voice cutting cold and clear through the hall, loud enough for everyone to hear. Daniel Harris, you are seriously ill. Delusion is a sickness, and it needs to be treated. I turned to the guards, my tone sharp. What are you waiting for? Remove him. And from now on, anyone showing signs of mental instability like this must never be allowed inside. The guards finally reacted, rushing forward. Each grabbed an arm, dragging Daniel away as he thrashed and howled. Emily, you can't treat me like this. We were together for 35 years, Emily. His cries grew fainter and fainter until they vanished beyond the grand doors. For a moment the ballroom was silent. Then the whispers swelled into an even louder wave of gossip. I drew a deep breath, adjusted my gown, and turned back with my most composed smile. Lifting my glass, I addressed the crowd. Just a small disturbance, sorry for the inconvenience. Alexander Foster stepped to my side, his dark gaze sweeping the room, radiating a pressure none could ignore. Show's over. Time to disperse, isn't it? At once, people lowered their heads and quickly shifted their attention, pretending nothing had happened. Alexander leaned close, his voice low enough for only me to hear. Handled beautifully. I tilted my lips in the faintest smile but said nothing, though my palms felt slightly cold. Daniel Harris. At last, you've truly gone mad. Fine, those words of regret. I've waited 2 lifetimes to hear them. Now that I have, all I feel is that it's far too late. The spectacle at the charity gala inevitably spread, even though Alexander had stepped in to suppress it. Whispers still escaped. The Harris boy gone crazy for love, kneeling in front of Emily Johnson, raving about past lives. Rumors ran wild through high society. My father was so furious he nearly had Daniel taken care of outright, but I stopped him. For a man like that, lowering ourselves would only stain the Nguyen family's name. Alexander didn't bring it up again. Instead, he sought me out even more often afterward, always with the excuse of easing my stress, taking me to dinners and restaurants. I knew what he was doing, showing me he wasn't bothered by that spectacle, that I shouldn't let it weigh on me either. It was, in a way, oddly comforting. But I never imagined Daniel could spiral so far. Somehow, he got hold of my personal number. Then came the endless calls and messages. At first, they were pathetic apologies, crying that he hadn't truly betrayed me, begging for another chance. When I ignored them, the tone shifted, angrier, more agitated, questioning how I could be so cruel. 35 years of love, forgotten just like that? In the end, perhaps dulled by alcohol and shattered by despair, his messages twisted into something warped, something frightening. The messages even turned threatening. Emily, you must be mine. We're destined to be husband and wife. Who the hell is Alexander Foster? If you don't come back to me, I'll expose everything about us and let the whole world know. If I can't live in peace, no one will. Especially him. Reading those crazed words on the screen sent a chill straight down my spine. Daniel Harris had sunk to the lowest depths and wanted to drag me down with him. This couldn't go on. I took a deep breath and typed a single reply. Daniel Harris, meet me one last time. I picked the place. I needed to end this nuisance once and for all. I chose a quiet cafe in a private room. By the time I arrived, he was already there, hunched in the corner of the sofa, greasy hair hanging limp, eyes sunken, his body reeking of alcohol and smoke. He looked even worse than the last time I'd seen him. When he saw me walk in, his cloudy eyes suddenly lit up. He leapt to his feet, almost frantic. Emily, you finally agreed to see me. I knew it, you still have feelings for me. I cut him off coldly, moving past him and taking the seat across the table, deliberately keeping a wide distance. The server entered and I ordered a coffee, nothing for him. His face faltered, somewhere between embarrassed and resentful. The door shut, leaving only the two of us. I fixed him with a steady gaze, wasting no time. Daniel Harris, stop with the ridiculous messages and threats. I didn't come here to hear you repent, and I certainly didn't come to give you another chance. His face went pale. Emily, please, at least hear me out. My voice was icy, leaving no room for argument. You keep talking about 35 years? Fine, let's settle those 35 years right now. In our last life, I begged my father to use the Nguyen family's money and resources to drag you out of bankruptcy. Without me, Daniel, who knows what gutter you'd have rotted away in. It was me who used my family's connections to pave the way for your so-called talent. Me who helped you climb to the top. It was me who cared for your sick mother, who cleaned up all the Harris family's messes so you could focus on your career. It was me who rushed you to the hospital when you vomited blood from drinking too much with clients, then stayed up all night at your bedside. It was me who handed you the entire Nguyen Corporation to manage, while I willingly stepped back to be the woman behind you. 35 years, Daniel Harris. I gave you everything, my time, my strength, my devotion, for you and your family. And what did you give me in return? My voice rose, thick with the resentment I had buried across 2 lifetimes. You repaid me with 35 years of ice-cold indifference. With a heart that always had room for another woman who was long dead. With your final words before death, let's go our separate ways. Tell me, Daniel Harris, this so-called 35 years of marriage, was it I who owed you, or you who owed me? It was as if an invisible hammer had smashed into him. He collapsed back into the sofa, trembling, lips quivering, unable to form words. Tears streamed from those murky eyes, real tears, unplanned, the tears of a man who had utterly broken down. I leaned forward slightly, my voice razor-sharp. Now you've been given another chance at life. You finally got what you wanted, to fly high with your pure, perfect moonlight. So tell me, how does it feel? To be hunted down by loan sharks like a dog? To be played for a fool by Linda Moon? Is that the love you dreamed of? Do you only remember me now, when you can't survive anymore? I laughed, cold and mocking, my words cutting deeper than any blade. So now you realize I was the one who fed you, clothed you, and gave you a life of luxury? Too late. I rose to my feet, looking down at him from above. His whole body trembled like a leaf in the winter wind as I delivered my final verdict. Daniel Harris, I don't need you anymore. I didn't need you in the last life, and I certainly don't need you in this one. Your so-called deep love, your regret, your suffering, they're not worth a single cent to me. They only make me sick. Don't ever show yourself in front of me again. Don't disturb me. Or else. I pulled out my phone, shaking it lightly to show the deranged messages he had sent me. I won't hesitate to let the world see your disgusting face. Let's see whether you destroy me first, or whether I drag you down until you lose everything, including the last shred of air you're breathing. I didn't bother to look at his shattered expression or his crushed despair. I turned, opened the door, and walked out quickly. Outside, the sunlight blazed bright and dazzling. I drew in a long breath of fresh air, feeling that suffocating weight pressing on my chest for 2 lifetimes finally lift away. Behind me, from inside the room, came the sound of muffled sobbing, raw and broken, like a wounded beast. That was his hell. It had nothing to do with me anymore. From that day on, after I crushed Daniel Harris completely, my world finally returned to peace. He stopped showing up. No more insane messages. I heard he had collapsed entirely, living day to day in a fog, scraping by with odd jobs just to survive. Supposedly, he struck some kind of deal with his creditors to delay payment, but no one knew the details. I didn't care to know. My life had turned a page at last. The chapter named Daniel Harris was closed. My days became busier but meaningful. The projects I led at the company advanced smoothly. My father placed more and more authority in my hands, and the influence and resources I could command grew steadily. Alexander Foster was still there, constantly appearing in my life with 1,000 different excuses. Driving me home, taking me out to dinner, bringing me along to his business events. His actions varied, but his attitude became more and more obvious. And I could feel the ice inside my heart beginning to melt. Honestly, with a man like Alexander Foster, it was hard not to be moved. He was strong, confident, direct. His tongue might be sharp, but his actions were always straightforward, never ambiguous. Around him, I felt safe. I learned so much, and I saw a wider world. Most importantly, when I was with him, I could be completely myself. I didn't need to tread carefully or flatter him. I could argue with him until my face turned red, or laugh freely without worrying about appearances. That comfort, that lightness, that was something I had never once felt in my past life with Daniel Harris. And yet, deep inside, a trace of hesitation lingered. Maybe because in my last life, the wounds cut too deep, leaving me instinctively fearful and doubtful of love itself. One day, Alexander Foster took me to tour a new AI technology center he had just invested in. Inside were cutting-edge innovations, dazzlingly modern. I was fascinated, thoroughly enjoying myself. In one of the VR experience pods, the vastness of the universe surrounded me, stars glittering in breathtaking beauty. Standing beside me, Alexander suddenly spoke, his deep voice resonating in the quiet space. "Emily?" "Yes?" I was still staring at the sparkling stars when he finally lost patience. He turned his head toward me, his profile sharp and defined under the starlight. "Give me a clear answer." My heart skipped, and I tried to play dumb. "Answer to what?" He gave a quiet laugh. "Do I really have to spell it out for you?" Without waiting, he turned my shoulders so I was facing him. His eyes locked on mine, carrying that commanding, decisive air so unique to him. "I like you. I want to be with you. I'm not joking, I'm serious. Do you agree?" My heart pounded wildly, my cheeks flushed. Even though I'd long sensed this moment was coming, hearing him state it so bluntly still left me breathless. The stars drifted behind him, and the silence was so deep, I could hear both our breaths. His eyes held nothing but sincerity, not a trace of jest. All my hesitation and fear suddenly felt useless. The past was gone. I couldn't let one worthless man make me shut the door on every possibility for happiness in the future. Alexander Foster wasn't Daniel Harris, and I wasn't the naive Emily of my past life anymore. I drew in a deep breath, looked straight into his eyes, and nodded. "Okay." Alexander froze for a beat, clearly not expecting me to agree so quickly. Then the corners of his lips curved up, his gaze lighting like a galaxy bursting into brilliance. "You mean it?" he asked, his voice carrying unhidden joy. I laughed. "Yes, I mean it." He suddenly pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly, his chin resting on the top of my head. His voice was low, steady, and full of promise. "Don't worry, I'm nothing like that piece of trash." Leaning against his chest, I listened to his steady heartbeat and breathed in the faint cedar scent clinging to him. The foggy unease lingering in my heart finally dissipated. Yes, he truly was nothing like that man. From the moment we left the tech center, he never let go of my hand. His grip was warm and firm as he walked me all the way to my front door. This time, he didn't leave right away. He lingered, holding my hand, making small talk like he wasn't ready to go. At last, he lowered his head and brushed a quick kiss against my forehead. "I'll pick you up for work tomorrow," he said, his tone light, a little smug. My face burned as I murmured, "Okay," before rushing into the house. With my back pressed to the door, I raised a hand to the spot where he had kissed me. My heart was still racing. The feeling was indescribable. The next morning when I stepped outside, his flashy supercar was already waiting at the curb. He leaned casually against it, and the moment he saw me, he came forward naturally, taking my bag, opening the car door for me. On the drive, at a red light, he leaned in to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. The motion was effortless, intimate. "There's a family dinner tonight," he said as if he were just mentioning the weather. "My mother wants to meet you." I almost choked on my own breath. "That fast?" He arched a brow. "Fast? I think it's already too slow. Don't worry, it's just dinner. My mom's easygoing. She won't eat you alive. Meeting the parents at rocket speed, huh?" But looking at how natural and matter-of-fact he was about it, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. Fine. Meet her then. After all, this time it really seemed like I had chosen the right person. After Alexander and I officially confirmed our relationship, my life felt like it had hit the fast-forward button. Meeting his mother went more smoothly than I expected. Mrs. Foster was an elegant, open-minded lady, not at all pretentious. She held my hand and talked with me for a long time, then finally gave me a beautiful jade bracelet of excellent quality as a gift. I tried to refuse, but in the end I had no choice but to accept. Alexander stood beside me, the corners of his lips curved the whole time. It was clear he was happy. Work, too, was going smoothly. With Alexander Foster occasionally offering me pointers, my progress skyrocketed. At this point, my father had practically half retired, entrusting both major and minor affairs of the company to me with full authority. The large projects I personally approved all turned into massive successes, bringing in profits many times over. The old board members who once saw me only as the spoiled daughter of the Nguyen family now had to acknowledge me as CEO Nguyen in every sense. Alexander and I, our alliance between two powerful forces, had become a legend in the business circle. Almost no one mentioned Daniel Harris anymore, who by now was nothing more than a joke. Every so often, I still caught scraps of gossip about him. Apparently, Linda Moon later latched onto a wealthy man as old as her father, becoming his mistress, only to be publicly humiliated when the man's wife stripped her clothes off in the street during a jealous rage. After that scandal, she disappeared completely. No one knew where she'd crawled off to. As for Daniel, he had sunk entirely into alcohol and gambling, debts piling upon debts. The loan sharks had lost all patience and seemed ready to take care of him once and for all. Rumor had it he was on the run, hiding who knows where in the shadows of society. I happened to hear these stories while Alexander and I were picking out engagement rings. The clerk laid out a dazzling array of pigeon egg diamonds, making my head spin. Alexander slipped his arm around my waist, his chin resting lazily on my shoulder as he pointed to the largest one. "How about this? Shiny enough to match you." I burst out laughing. "Are you buying a ring or a light bulb?" In the end, I chose a design more intricate and unique, not overly flashy, but just as valuable. Alexander didn't argue. He swiped his card as casually as if he were buying something at a street stall instead of a $1 million ring. Sliding the ring onto my finger, it fit perfectly. He held my hand for a long while, then lowered his head to kiss the back of it. His eyes glimmered with both playfulness and seriousness. "Consider yourself bound. From now on, you're the lady of the Foster family." I gazed at the sparkling diamond on my finger, my heart filled with a profound sense of peace and happiness. This was what I wanted: a love of equals, a man who cherished me, a future built by my own hands. And Daniel Harris? His name, along with his pitiful downfall, was nothing more than dust drifting outside a window, incapable of stirring even the faintest ripple in my heart. He had once grasped the freedom and love he craved, only to choke on the bitter fruit of his choices. 2 lifetimes he had squandered, proving himself blind in both heart and vision, until he became a man even he must despise. That was enough. Later, Alexander and I went on vacation abroad. We lay sunbathing by the sea, under a sky so blue and clouds so white it looked like a painting. I wore sunglasses, sipping fruit juice, and watched as he awkwardly helped a group of blonde, blue-eyed children build sandcastles. I couldn't hold back my laughter. Sensing my gaze, he looked back at me. Bathed in sunlight, his smile was silly yet warm, and my chest tightened with a strange feeling. Suddenly, a distant memory resurfaced. The cold hospital room from so long ago, the frail man with bony hands, his voice sharp as a blade. "In the next life, let's go our separate ways. You walk your road, I'll walk mine. Forget each other in the sea of people." And now I truly had taken another bridge, walked another road. On this side of the bridge, the scenery bloomed with beauty. On this path, flowers flourished in full bloom. As for him, his so-called world had long dissolved into the endless crowd, leaving not a single trace